I would like to preface my remarks with the following. Sir Lyndon Pinling once said, "A government's mandate is primarily the physical world, the material world. However, the spiritual domain is no less important, and it clearly is the province of the church." Bahamians needed a vision to come this far. From the day that Prince William landed in the Bahamas and founded Bethel Baptist Church, almost 200 years ago, the church has played an intricate role in the development of our country, spiritually strengthening our people for the battle for freedom and equality. Your generation, the Joshua generation, will need a vision of its own, a vision for the 21st century, a vision of the kind of society in which you and your children will want to live. Your vision may be a new one, but in planning your life and the society you want to build, you will find that the foundation of your wisdom and your vision will be the same of your forefathers. Therefore, their foundation was built on three very important things: God, family, and country. And I can tell you, said Sir Lyndon, that you will not be able to find better ones. I'd like to tell you that the Kingdom movement has four foundational bases. One, the replacement of the Westminster system. Two, transforming the educational system. Three, transforming the economy. And four, transforming the health of our nation. I'd like to quote a very famous man that once said, Nathan Rothschild. He once said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. I care not what puppet is placed on the throne. The man that controls the money controls the empire." In 1965, Sir Lyndon traveled to the United Nations, and this was called the Decolonization Committee. Along with Sir Lyndon, he took with him Sir Cecil Wallace Whitfield, Mr. Clarence Bain, Mr. Milo Butler, Mr. Arthur Hanna, Mr. Arthur Folkes, Dr. Doris Johnson, and Dr. Herbert W. Brown. And he said, "Mr. Chairman, all ministers in the Bahamian cabinet are Bahamian born, with the exception of one who was granted a special status roughly equivalent to that of being Bahamian born. They all belong to the merchant oligarchy, which has been in control since 1729 and of European extraction. Ministers own large blocks of shares in the majority of local enterprises and benefit from government contracts, all with the tacit approval of the United Kingdom government. For example, Roland Simonet, Prime Minister, is perhaps the biggest road builder in the country. The Minister of Maritime Affairs is a major supplier of lumber and hardware goods to the government and perhaps the biggest ship owner in the country. The Minister of Agriculture has large farming interests and supplies air conditioning material to the government, as does the Minister of Electricity. The Minister of Finance and Tourism is the head of a food chain, an insurance company, and a law firm, which often represents his ministry and his clients at the same time. That state of affairs, says Sir Lyndon, has always existed. Before ministerial government was introduced, executive government was shared by public boards whose chairman and members acted in the same manner as the present ministers. At the same time of the 1963 Constitutional Conference, the point was raised by both the representatives of the Progressive Liberal Party and the Labour Party. The United Kingdom representatives were appraised of the situation and allowed, and although they agreed that such conduct was not entirely satisfactory, they still considered that in the circumstances it may be advisable for them to leave things as they were. The matter of conflict of interest, said Sir Lyndon, was also discussed in great detail in the House of Assembly after ministerial government was introduced in January 1964, but no action was taken. Sir Lyndon says every single member of the government engages in business and receives lucrative government contracts at the same time. The United Kingdom is aware of this, he said, and the fact that because of such a system, it is easy to imagine the abuse and the corruption that it may lead to. Yet nothing has been done. He said, while the ruling group is accumulating great wealth, it is also maintaining an iniquitous method of taxation, and the wealthy are by no means bearing their fair share of the tax burden. The overall picture of the present situation in the Bahamas, said Sir Lyndon, is that the country is literally, economically, and financially in the very same hands that exercise political control. Moreover, for 3 centuries, the British have never introduced any development plan for the islands to improve the situation of the people, both socially and economically. And we are now paying for centuries of neglect. In these circumstances, he said, we are convinced that the opposition can no longer fulfill its functions. It cannot lend itself to what is in fact nothing more than a dictatorship disguised as a democracy. I say to you this morning, in the not too distant future, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas will be embarking on 50 years of independence as we enter our jubilee. The Westminster model, as a part of a larger independence pact, was designed to maintain the status quo in the English-speaking Caribbean and is responsible for the major challenges facing the Bahamas today. We, therefore, of the Kingdom Government Movement, advocate for a broader conceptualization of sovereignty and calls for the invention of a new democracy. Most people don't know that unlike modern states, United Kingdom itself does not have a codified or written constitution, but written ones are formed of acts of parliament, court judgments, and conventions. Therefore, the politics of colonialization and colonialism is the politics of exclusion. The politics of independence would be the politics of participation. This has nothing to do with the Westminster model of government. In my reading, the Westminster system was and continues to be an element in a package. The Independence Pact in the British Caribbean. This pact was not about independence. It was about the preservation of the status quo. And the essentials are, first, the entrenchment of property rights in the Constitution. Second, entrenchment of the two-party system. Third, the preservation of laws, institutions, and symbols of the colonial state. And fourth, alliance with the Western powers in the Cold War. I will illustrate this by sharing with you factual recollections and observations. Though the father of our nation, Sir Lyndon, was advised by the monarchy that it would not be advisable for the Bahamas to retain the monarchy simply because it would have presented a problem for growing Bahamas in the future. He was advised that it would be contrary to psychological necessities of nation building, that Queen of England would be the head of state of an independent Bahamas. Looking back, I have to confess to a feeling of grudging admiration for this ingenious device. It had the effect of embedding the core symbol of colonial governance in the institutions and rituals of the independent Bahamas. It connoted continuity rather than rupture. And I'd argue that it institutionalized a fractured psyche of politic allegiance among those who are to be responsible for running the affairs of our country. What does it do to the state of mind of the Governor General, the Prime Minister, ministers of the government, parliamentary secretaries, members of Parliament, and of the judiciary, when as a condition of assuming and holding office, each one is required to take an oath to be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. This feature of the Constitution confers upon our political leaders a cynical betrayal of the masses. We declare that we have been brainwashed in the British culture. The template of the Constitution was, I presume, supplied by the Colonial Office. The details were negotiated by a joint select committee of the House of Assembly of the Bahamas and the two main political parties. It is structured in a way that the two are virtually guaranteed an indefinite duopoly of political power. It is almost impossible to change the Constitution without the agreement of both parties. And we see that today. It's quite evident. The implanting of colonial ways of thinking into native elites was one of the outstanding successes of the British policy in the Caribbean. It was key to the entrenchment of the Westminster system of government in the soon-to-be independent Bahamas. Reading the Constitution of the Bahamas today is a surreal experience for me. This is a great difficulty in thinking of it as the Constitution of an independent Bahamas. The document is actually a royal order in council. You will not find anything in it remotely like to the reference in sovereignty of the people. The final judicial authority, including on matters concerning the interpreting of the Constitution itself, is the British Privy Council. The Independence Pact, I want you to remember that word, the Independence Pact, was made between the British, the Bahamian political and elite class that had emerged. The Bahamians would exercise formal political authority. The economy would remain in the hands of foreign firms and the local oligarchy. American, British, and Canadian firms were to be entrenched in banking and finance, while local landowners and merchants controlled the best land, tourism, and import trading. A key element would be a security apparatus with close links to the imperialist system. Looking back over the past 50 years, we see that nothing has changed. But still, we see both continuity and change to some extent. At one level, the colonialist strategy succeeded very well. The population has been diverted from any agenda of revolutionary transformation. Politics is a perpetual game of alternating ins and outs, and winner takes all. It is characterized mainly by mudslinging, sensationalism, and pursuit of trivia. Every 5 years, a cornucopia of election campaign promises is routinely made. Few are kept. People participation is limited to chairing at election rallies and a 10-second act of voting every 5 years. Government is reduced to prime ministerial dictatorship. Long-term issues of development are hardly ever on the agenda of popular political discourse. Let's look at the Jamaican case. In 1970, the government of Michael Manley introduced wide-ranging social reforms, redistributed income, and expanded state control over the economy. He took steps to address the social debt that was the legacy of 300 years of colonialism, slavery, and the plantation system. The empire, Great Britain, the monarchy, and the local oligarchy struck back at Mr. Manley. His experiment was crippled by capital flight, shrinking export revenues, and the IMF mandated austerity. By the end of 1990, he had been voted out of office, and it was back to business as usual. In the governance of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, allegations against both political parties of corruption, lack of transparency, and accountability are concerns everywhere the Westminster system is used today. First, corruption, the plunder of state resources by politicians and their cronies. Second, insidious and largely invisible influence of money in politics and in the determination of state policy. Lack of transparency and accountability. Third, the problem of unchecked executive power. Fourth, the emasculation of the legislative branch. Fifth, weakness of a non-existent of avenues for citizen participation in governance. Participation is reduced to voting at 5-year intervals. And sixth, the weakness of local government. I will not try your patience by reciting a whole lot of facts and figures. A convenient way to sum up the situation is to report to you regions around the Commonwealth. All of us are in serious debt today. All of us are in trouble. Every country that has the Westminster system is experiencing the same challenges. All of us. But a lot of money will be needed. You're not going to find money domestically when the country is already heavily indebted. Neither can you borrow abroad commercially, for you are no longer creditworthy. And this comes about because the IMF has been preparing the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for compliance under the World Trade Organization rules. When you can no longer service your debt, you have no recourse but to run to the IMF. That means budget cuts, further depletion of resources to fight crime, adapt to climate change, build up your own human and physical capital, and pay your teachers and policemen adequately. More professionals leave, you are in IMF trusteeship. Make no mistake about it. Our Bahamas is in the throes of the greatest crisis since independence. The specter of evolving into a failed society is no longer a subject of imagination. How our country will crawl out of this vicious vortex of persistent low growth, crippling debt, huge fiscal deficits, and high unemployment, no diversification of the economy, is the single most important question facing us at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, our beloved Bahamas is in a state of crisis. Our post-colonial state has collapsed. There's a feeling of lost hope. This is not what our forefathers fought and died for, a state of crisis manifesting itself in various forms. The system of governance itself has failed. It's spiraling out of control, degenerating into barbarianism. This is not what Zalinden fought for in our early years. They did not fight to create society based on individualism. They did not fight for self-governance so that some politicians can pillage and plunder the treasury, enriching themselves. They certainly did not fight to build a country where party financiers reign supreme. This is the kind of country we're seeing being built every single day. It's a sobering thought. Economic realities have turned national sovereignty into an illusion, a legal formality that is increasingly devoid of substance. We have not managed our sovereignty well, Bahamians. We and all, the first requirement of sovereignty is the ability to manage your own affairs and pay your own way in the world, and we haven't done that well. So the question is, going forward, can the national project be rescued? What is the meaning of sovereignty to countries like ours in the new global order? And where does the Westminster system fit into all of this? Terms such as food sovereignty, energy independence, the indigenous capacity to manage and adapt to climate change, the capacity to secure your borders and your people, the ability to speak knowledgeably and convincingly in global fora, and to be taken seriously. Above all, sovereignty means the capacity of a society and its citizenry to think for themselves. It begins in the mind. And what about the Westminster system? Here again, there's the issue of form versus substance. We are searching for a theory and practice of true democracy that break free from the shackles of Westminsterism. We need forms of political participation, informed citizens engaged with the urgent issues of survival and with the kind of society that we wish to create, forms that promote the building of social consensus across the cleavages of class, color, ethnicity, gender, and political tribalism. I thank you very much. I'd like to introduce to you today some members of our team. Jeffrey Simonette. He is the Director of Manufacturing, Industry, Applied Science. Thank you, sir. Mr. Samuel Johnson, he's the Chairman. Mr. McLean Seymour is our spiritual advisor. Our secretary is Mrs. Portia Duncanson. And our research and development, Mr. Derek Bullard. So we are open to your questions If you have any for us, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Do apologize, we came in a bit late. I'm not sure if this was covered as yet, but just the plans you are planning to run in 2022. What is the plan to gain persons to run in the various constituencies, forming a constitution, and also just anything pertaining to actually getting your foot in the race?
Well, we've started quite early, as you can see. We would like to have a representative from each district because we're going to divide the Bahamas into districts. It will no longer be as it is today. We would like to see full participation in the Bahamas from all sectors of society. This system of governance has failed. This is an antiquated system. It's an oppressive system. Unfortunately, after election is over, the people have no more voice. It's over. The system of governance is designed that once you are the one that's in governance, that's it. So it matters not whether you, the Bahamian citizenry, complain. It matters not that you march down Bay Street and display your displeasure. The governing party rules until the next 5 years. The plan generally is, before the next 5 years comes to an end, they would give you a lot of caveats. They make a lot of promises. They start to do a lot of things to distract you until the next 5 years, and you're complaining. And the cycle continuously repeats itself over and over and over again. And as you can see, the country is moving backwards. We're not going forward. And unfortunately, that's the state of our country today. And no matter what you say, no matter how you scream and cry and holler, it's going to be that way until election season the next few years. Okay?
I'm not sure I was clear in my question. What
Go
are
ahead.
you going to do to get candidates to run in each specific constituency? And will their criteria, speaking to your constitution, will their criteria be that they have to be Christian? Or how is your party actually going to be set up?
No, it's not a matter of being Christian. It's a matter of being like-minded citizens. You're interested in your country. It is not so much a Christian movement. It's a Bahamian movement. And it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. We're only concerned about Bahamians. You'd find that we have no colors, okay? We're not interested in dividing the country. You can come as you are. So whether you want to wear gold, purple, red, blue, or green, that's up to you. This particular organization, we're not color-coded. We're not color-minded. We are Bahamian-oriented. We are people-oriented. And if those persons feel that they have a need to, they have something to contribute to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and they decide that this is an organization that they want to be a part of, then we welcome them. We would like to see everyone from a particular district running in their own district, because the system how it is now, it will not be the same. It will not be the same any longer.
My final question to you is you spoke about changing the Westminster system.
Mhm.
Yesterday in Parliament, the Speaker said some very outlandish things about having an independent Speaker, about downsizing the cabinet. Are you, too, looking at those type of changes for the government?
The government as we know it today will not exist in theory how it is now. It will be a totally different type of government, but it will not be a government where the Bahamian people will be shocked. We're not going to do something so drastic, make such a drastic change that the whole country becomes in anarchy, as we say. But there has to be changes. The House of Parliament as it is right now, it doesn't lend to really adhering to your voice or to my voice. There's an agenda that is dictated in the House of Assembly by the governing party, irregardless of what you say or what I say or anyone else say. We want to bring governance back to the people where it should be, where it should have been all along.
So can you give us some more concrete details about what this new government will look like? Will it be like a parliamentary republic instead?
Basically, you hit the nail on the head. It will be parliamentary republic. We'll take the best of both systems and implement it into the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It's not very difficult to do. It's whether or not the Bahamian people have the will and the desire for real change. The question is, are you satisfied with your governance over the past 45 years? We have seen a decline in our governance, we've seen a decline in our country, while others prosper, and the basic citizenry stays the same. And no matter what changes they bring, it really doesn't affect you at this particular time in any positive light. But they are making laws every single day that in the next 10 or 20 years, the Bahamas will look nothing like you knew it to be. Yes?
Hi, from here. Okay, I think it's been said before, a number of Bahamians just seem not to be ready for change. Obviously, we've seen what happened to the DNA party, which seemed to be a thriving party, but then ended up, of course, kind of, I guess, basically, right, flocking, essentially. How do you approach that with Bahamians just essentially talking about change, but not necessarily putting in their votes to, per se, say that they really are adamant about a change with a new party, and how we haven't been as receptive to a new party?
I think in the past 5 years, there's been a preparation for change. Change doesn't come overnight, but you can see the nation's dissatisfaction with both parties at this time. The nation is beginning to understand that these are they're just the same party. Nothing really changes. And the reason why that happens is because that's how this Westminster system is. Okay? 5 years, the reigning party. Next 5 years, the opposition. And the vicious cycle continues. Nothing really changes. And that's why I read earlier how this system is designed is just to keep these two parties in and out. And they accept that. That's the design of the system. They don't mind, the PLP or the FNM don't mind losing because they know eventually one will come back. And yet still they control, basically they only control the party, but they're still outsiders, the oligarchies that basically controls the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Not the directorate. It's 2 for 1. Whichever government is in power today, they do not really control the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The oligarchies do, and they have been from 1729, and it has not changed. All they are mere puppets. It has not changed. And I only need to have you look around at your country and see where the changes are. And has anything really changed since you were born? I'm merely going on into my 60th birthday. And I see a country that's regressing, and it's not progressing. And we definitely will have to change the whole dynamics of the country so that you can finally be free and independent. We can really have an independent Bahamas because we are not an independent Bahamas. And I think most of your Joshua generation are beginning to become disenchanted and realize that we are not in an independent Bahamas. And we seek to change that, to bring the governance of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas back to the people.
Do you plan to go into the various family islands to spread your message and basically to rally people to vote for
Yes, this is going to be a full onslaught of campaign, but unlike one that they've ever seen. Our process, even though it might be a little bit more challenging, because it's very difficult to change the mindset of a people that's been accustomed to thinking one way for so long. But I think it's divine that the mindset of the Bahamian people are changing. They realize that these two governments are exactly the same. When one goes out, the other one comes, and they bring the same ones back. And it's just a recycling, a regurgitation, as it were, of the same persons every single time.
Well, you said the parties are necessarily rooted in Christianity or looking for Christian candidates, right? But there is this apparent, this rhetoric of Christianity throughout what we've seen his day. How do you plan to reach out to people who may feel concerned about the religious freedoms of all Bahamians?
Even though you may think that it's religious in its connotations, the fact is, it's all Bahamians. All. And you have to respect all Bahamians, irregardless of your political persuasion, your religious persuasion, all Bahamians. As long as you're a Bahamian, that's the only thing that matters. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less.
If you were to come to government today, in concerns to Grand Bahama, what would you do if you found out?
I'm going to direct that question to my colleague who lives in Grand Bahama and we have such a brilliant plan for Grand Bahama. Before he comes on, let me say this. Things are not as bad as it seems, you know. It's just what they would not do. For instance, if all the companies that are mining in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, that are mining our natural resources, would become interested in the Bahamas, interested in the community, Grand Bahama would not be the same. But the mere fact that they're doing things in secrecy, without being truthful to the Bahamian people, while they're making billions and billions of dollars, you don't hear them crying and complaining, those who are mining our natural resources. You don't hear a lot about the natural resources simply because it is an elitist organization. Those that control our natural resources have been doing so for quite some time, but the Bahamian people themselves do not benefit from the natural resources because they tell us we have none. But yet still they're mining every single day. Mr. Simonet, who has worked for BORCO for some 36 years, 32 years, is very knowledgeable about what goes on in Freeport. So I'd let him, please.